Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. This is one of my favorite talks to give. I've done a similar webinar to this before, and I've given this talk to schools, to nannies, to teachers, parents, all sorts of professionals and parents, anybody who lives or works with children, because if you work or live with highly sensitive children, you know how challenging it can be. And once you understand what it is that's going on for these kids and you have some new insight and a couple of new tools, things can really shift in a dramatic way. And so I'm really excited to share a couple of secrets. They're secrets only because people don't necessarily know about them overtly, but they're secrets that I have come to learn, that I share with my private clients, and that I really want to give you today, so that when you leave this session, you've got some new understanding and a couple of new resources in your back pocket that you can carry with you into your experience with your highly sensitive children. I also want to say that what I'm going to share with you will work for kids of any age. I'll try and use examples for children that are younger. I'm talking like 5 and under, kind of school agers, that's 6 through 10, 11, teenagers, middle and high school students. And here's the truth. This also works with highly sensitive adults, because we all want the same stuff in life. We all want to be understood, to be seen, to be appreciated and valued for who we are. And so while most of these secrets are specifically tailored to children, they will work in all of your relationships. I also want to say that I'm going to use language interchangeably here. I know that there are a lot of nannies, teachers, some doctors that are on this session with me also, in addition to parents. We've got single parents, parents who've adopted children, grandparents, all sorts of constellations that are here. And so please, filter whatever it is that I say into the lens that applies to you, because the tools that I'm giving you are things that will work in the home, in a classroom, in an office, in sort of all different settings. So here goes. The first secret that I want to give you today is that you don't have to change who these kids are. So many parents, when they come to me, are concerned, their hearts are breaking for their children, they are wanting kids to be different than who they are, nannies are struggling to get through their day, teachers are losing control of their classroom. And here's the truth. These kids are who they are. When I'm talking about highly sensitive children, what I'm talking about is the 15 to 20, maybe even 25% of the population that was born with the genetic trait of sensory processing sensitivity. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about sensory stuff. I'm not talking about a disorder. I'm talking about a genetic trait that is innate. It is hardwired into who we are, and it will never change over our lifetime. Just like the color of our eyes or the color of our hair, our skin, while that might shift, from the time that we're little until we're older, it is what it is. And no matter how much you want to change a child's eyes, let's say from green to brown, you cannot do it. There's nothing that you can will onto this child to change their eye color or their skin color or their hair color or their height. If I could be 6 foot tall, I would. It's not going to happen. And the same is true with temperament, with sensitivity. That's what we're talking about here. So children that are highly sensitive, or adults that are highly sensitive, I'm one of them, are born this way. They generally show their sensitivity from very early on in their infancy, in their toddler years, and high sensitivity can look different. So I want to offer a real brief overview for people that are new to the trait. High sensitivity is a spectrum, just like anything else. So some people that are highly sensitive, I would say, are more introverted and quiet and maybe even subdued, mellow, reserved. We might call them shy. I'm not using that as a judgment. It's like a slow to warm in new environments, with new people, new situations. On the other end of that spectrum are the extroverted, strong-willed, spirited, fiery, kind of bull in a china shop, highly sensitive people. That's who I am. These are the kids who know what they want. They are the boss. They won't take no for an answer. They are persistent. They are pushy, they can be really challenging to be with because they are going for whatever their inner drive is pushing them to. And those are the children that may be labeled as defiant or bossy. I use that label too. And when I'm using these labels, I'm not using them as judgment terms. I'm using them to get a picture of what their behavior looks like. And of course, with any spectrum, there's all of these kind of shades in between, right? So some people are closer to that sensitive introvert, where they're kind of quieter and reserved, and more fall on the other end of the spectrum, where they're sort of extroverted and dominant and loud and in your face and strong-willed. And so once you come to understand who your child is, or who the child is that you're working with, living with, then you can stop judging who they are. You can stop trying to change them into something else. Part of the reason that I do the work that I do is when I was growing up, my parents didn't have a real understanding of who I was in the first few years of my life. I am the second of two children. My older brother is very easygoing, or at least he was when he was younger. He listened, he was good, he followed directions, he ate what was given to him. When he was told not to climb on something, he wouldn't climb on it. And then when I was born, nothing I did felt easy for my parents. They would present food to me and I didn't like the way that it looked, or it was messy, or touching other things, or smelled yucky. When I was told not to climb on something, I would look them right in the eye and keep going. I was that sort of defiant, strong-willed, persistent child right out of the gate. And because my parents didn't understand that that's who I was and it wasn't going to change, they spent a lot of time trying to change me, and it didn't work. It just led to a lot of frustration for them. So when you can make peace with who your child is, and you give up trying to change them or turn them into a different temperament than they were naturally born with, then you can relax. Then you can start to meet them where they are and come to understand what they need to behave differently. When we're talking about behavior, here's a mini secret. Behavior is really communication. It's your child's way of non-verbally communicating with you. When they were infants, they would cry if they were hungry or tired or wet or wanted to be held. And as toddlers, they would hit or spit or stomp their feet or flail their body on the floor in a tantrum when they were upset or frustrated or feeling misunderstood. As teenagers, they might be slamming doors or rolling their eyes or avoiding talking to you. All of those behaviors are communication. It's their nonverbal way of letting you know that something isn't working for them. And when we can take that behavior as communication and not take it so personally, which is a whole other conversation to be had, then again, we can start to meet their needs. We can start to figure out what it is that's going on for them underneath the surface that's actually driving that behavior. Sometimes it's temperament and hardwiring. Sometimes there are other things that are going on, but all of it is, it's indicative of their experience. When we don't feel like we've got to change it, when we instead begin to look at it as, what can I learn here? What can I do for this child? Then we've got a lot of power. I want to give you another sort of parallel here, that another metaphor here that you can use, this parallel of, let's look at cars for a moment. And I don't know anything about cars, but I do know a lot about children. And I love to use the metaphor of cars when talking about kids, because it helps us step a little bit away from a child and not take it so personally, which is one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And when we think about kids and their hardwiring, their innate way of being born, we can think about a Prius and a Porsche, right? A Prius is sort of a low maintenance car. It gets you around town. It's not very flashy. It doesn't ask for a whole lot. It doesn't care if it's got a spare tire. It doesn't care what kind of gas you put in it. If there's a crack in the windshield, it'll still get you to Target and soccer practice and all of the kind of things that you are doing for the purpose of using this car. The Prius is sort of like that low maintenance child, kind of like my brother, this just easygoing kid who doesn't have a whole lot of big needs, low maintenance. Okay. On the other end of that spectrum, and I'm not talking about the sensitivity spectrum here, I'm talking about the spectrum of temperament in general, kind of the way that all people are born into life. On that other end of the spectrum are the highly sensitive kids. And those can range, like I was talking about, from that quiet introvert to the dominant, strong-willed extrovert. Those kids are more like a Porsche. They're like a sports car. They are high needs. They ask a lot from you. They demand specific gasoline in their car. They need their tires to be inflated and rotated on a regular basis. If there's a scratch on that car or a crack in the windshield, it doesn't perform in quite the same way as if it's pristine and freshly washed and beautifully buffed. The sports car has a different purpose. It's not just for getting around town and running errands. It's for cruising. It's for driving. It's for getting places in style and luxury. It's got a different purpose. And the same thing is true for highly sensitive people. Highly sensitive people have a different purpose in life than non-highly sensitive people. They are more demanding. They are needier. They do require more maintenance, more care, and more understanding. But there's nothing wrong with them. Here's the main difference. When you go to purchase a car, you get to decide, do I want to put a lot of energy into maintaining it? Do I want to spend all the money that it's going to need to maintain this car? Am I looking for something that's low maintenance and low commitment? Or am I looking for something that's really going to take a lot from me? And you can choose if you want to get a Prius or a Porsche. But when you have a child, you don't get to decide on that child's temperament. You don't get to look through a book and say, oh yes, I'd like a child who's really easygoing and who isn't very sensitive and isn't very particular and adapts to things really easily and is able to focus for a long period of time. In other words, we don't get to choose out of a manual the way that a child looks when they're born. We get what we get. And so when you are born, when your child is born and they're like a Porsche and they are needy and demanding and high maintenance, we often feel overwhelmed and maybe take it personally because it's not the dream or the vision that we had. If you're working with these children, it may not be why you went into teaching or nannying. You know, when we choose to have children, it's usually because we love them and we have this dream about what life is going to look like. And if you dream about maintaining a Prius, but you end up with a Porsche, it can feel really exhausting and really overwhelming. And so I want to remind you that you cannot change a Porsche into a Prius. But what you can do is learn how to maintain that Porsche. You can learn how to give that child what they need to maintain their peak performance level, to be at their optimal. And that's my goal for today, is to give you a couple of those tools. So to reiterate, the first secret is you don't have to change who these children are. And once you get to understand who they are and what they need, you're well on your way to an easier ride. If anybody's got any questions at any point, there is a little chat box down on the side. If you're on a computer or an iPad, you're welcome to type your questions in. I see one question came in. Yes, this is being recorded. You will be able to share it, and I will send an email out once it's over. So the second secret that I want to share with you, and you might be rolling your eyes when I share this one, is that challenges are actually gifts. When your child has a breakdown, when they freak out, when they lose it, when they become overwhelmed and can't handle life, it's actually an opportunity for your child to learn how to handle things. And the reason why that breakdown is happening is because there are some tools that they don't yet have. If we think about this car metaphor again. If you were driving a car and a check engine light came on your dashboard, maybe it said that your gas tank was low. You might not freak out if you know that there's a gas station nearby and you can go refuel it. If you understand what that engine light means and you can do something about it, it's not that big of a deal. You recognize that there's something going on for the car. There's a need that it needs more gasoline, and you can meet that need. What happens with children is that it's often hard for us as the adults to take a breath and relax and see that breakdown for what it is, which is an opportunity to give them a new tool, an opportunity to fuel them up, metaphorically. If that child had the tool that they needed in the moment, the breakdown wouldn't be happening in the way that it is. So if we can see this experience as an opportunity rather than, oh, again, what am I going to do? Why is this happening? If only this child would be different, this wouldn't happen, right? Which kind of takes us back to that first secret of making peace with who this child is, not trying to change them. Then the same can be true for looking at challenges. We can see it as an opportunity to help them grow, to help them learn how to meet their need, to help them figure out why their check engine light is lighting up, right? If we really embody this idea that misbehavior is communication, then we don't have to see the misbehavior as something that's gone wrong, right? Then we can really see this misbehavior as an opportunity to fill up our toolbox, to become the mechanic, or to help that child really become the mechanic that they need so that they have all of the resources within them to handle whatever it is that life brings their way. Now, I also want to say here that a Porsche has more opportunities to break down than a Prius. In other words, that Porsche may have a fancier sound system and more components in the car. It might hit a pothole and get a flat tire. In other words, with a more high maintenance car, there are often more needs that come along with that car. And so the opportunity to have breakdowns or check engine lights come on is also higher. Again, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong here. It's about coming to understand who this child is and why they're more prone to having those breakdowns, why they're more prone to having those misbehaviors. I want to also say here that a lot of parents, when they hear me offer this metaphor about the cars, want to instantly become the mechanics for their children. And it takes a little while. Unlike cars, children don't come with manuals where it says, when my child bites me or slams a door or smacks their little sibling in the face or shrieks at the top of their lungs, this is what it means. It can be a little more challenging to decode what the misbehavior means. And so since I can't help everybody who's on here live, and especially everybody who's watching the recording, what I want to say is that is the work that I do with parents, both in private coaching and in group coaching. And I'll tell you a little bit more as we go along about a group coaching program that I'm doing that starts in just a couple of weeks, where you can actually learn how to become that mechanic for your child, right? It's a combination of understanding their temperament, their innate hardwiring, which is more complex than just sensitivity, and understanding how the environment is contributing to their misbehavior. What's going on for them at school, in the home, with other siblings, with their other parents, if there's divorce, if there's daycares, nannies involved, if there's a teacher that understands them or doesn't understand them. In other words, as a child gets older, and they are no longer just in your care on a regular basis, there are all of these environmental factors that come into play. And those are like the potholes on the road. You might be driving down the road and all of a sudden a check engine light comes on talking about your tire pressure. And that may be because you hit a pothole a couple miles back and now something in the car feels a little imbalanced. It can take us a little while in order to figure out how to diagnose what it is, the diagnostics inside of this particular child, what it is that's really contributing to their misbehaviors. When I was little, my older brother, who was so easygoing, also really liked to get a rise out of me. And one of the things that we often ran into was that when we would be sitting in the back of the car, for example, he loved to put his little pinky over the middle seat of the middle of the line in the middle seat. And I used to shriek, he's fingers on my side of the car. And I have these memories of my mom or my dad, whoever was driving, turning around and saying, if you ignored him, he would stop. And I remember feeling so powerless because I couldn't ignore him. As a sensitive person, it felt so big and so real and so overwhelming and so in my face that while it would have been nice for me to ignore him, I needed more. I needed more tools. And so when we're able to look at these challenges with children, whether it's through siblings or other things that happen in life, from the lens of how can I help this child ignore what's going on? How can I help this child handle this challenge that's showing up? Then we can really turn it into a gift. Then it can really become a learning lesson. What I needed as a child was a bridge to go from just ignore him to actually being able to do it. There were some tools that were missing for me in that in-between stage. And so one of the things that I've learned as an adult is how to be able to do that, how to ignore or energetically protect myself from things that don't feel good, how to advocate for myself in situations, how to speak up for my needs in ways so that they're heard and it's not just through shrieking and freaking out, which is what most sensitive children do, because they feel powerless in those moments. So when we can turn those moments into places where we say, this kid really needs some help here. They really don't know how to do it in another way. Then we can actually teach them. Then we can see that conflict in the car or, debacle at school or hitting that other kid on the playground or throwing their food on the floor into an opportunity to help them learn to do it differently the next time. Children don't come up with these ideas on their own. They don't just learn how to handle life better because we yell at them, shame them, or send them to their room, or isolate them, or spank them. Those are not effective ways to turn challenges into learning opportunities. Those are ways where children kind of go inward and shut down a little bit and feel badly about who they are. And then their behavior tends to get bigger the next time that it happens because they haven't learned from it. And so their misbehavior, which again is communication, it's their expression of help me in this moment, help me do it differently, give me a tool here, it'll just get bigger. If we think about the gas light on a car, once that gas light comes on, if we ignore it, it's not going to go away. And in fact, if we ignore it for long enough, the car is just going to run out of gas and peter to a stop. And we can demand that the car go all we want, but it's not going to go until we give it what it needs. And the same thing is true with kids. Their misbehavior will continue until we are able to give them what they need. So I hope so far y'all are with me and feeling this and taking these secrets and starting to see about how you can apply them. If you have any specific questions, feel free to ask along the way. I'm going to move on to our third secret, which is about dealing with these challenging moments, right? I've sort of given you an overview understanding about it, but let's talk about what it actually looks like. Here's the real secret. Your power to help this child do it differently is not in the moment of the struggle. All of your real power is before and after the challenge takes place. So what that really means is when we see the same sort of challenge come up over and over again, what we can do as adults and as the mechanics, right? If we know that the car is always going to run out of gas on Sunday evenings, then maybe on Sunday mornings we want to start and we want to go and refuel it. We know that that's about when the car is going to run out of gas. If your child has a breakdown every night at bath time, then we can start to look at the way that we're doing routines. If your child has a breakdown every day after school, or they're hysterical at school every day after lunch. In other words, if we start to notice some patterns, what we can do is help that child shift their routine, shift the way that they're handling things, create some breaks in their day, create some space for them to do things differently. If it's a young child, we can help create some new boundaries for them, new routines, help them do things in a way where they don't feel like they have to push back so much. If, for example, every time you leave the park with your 3, 4, 5-year-old, it ends with them in tears and you screaming at them and then feeling like a terrible person because you just got so frustrated and yelled and said, "It's time to go. I don't care if you want to stay. We have to go right now." Maybe what we want to do is create a new way to transition that child out of leaving the park. Maybe when we get to the park, we let them know we're going to be here for 20 minutes. And that means you can dig in the sandbox for a while, you can swing on the swings for a while, and I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning. And I'll let you know how many things you can do before it's time to go. And help that child learn what expectations look like, what time management looks like, in a way that is age appropriate for them. Very often I see parents or nannies saying things to kids like, "We're leaving in 2 minutes." And then they end up chatting with somebody for 10 minutes. And so 2 minutes doesn't really end up being 2 minutes. And that child might get an inconsistent sense of what timing looks like. Or a parent might say, "We're leaving in 2 minutes," but not help a child put that into their real world experience of what that looks like. And so a child goes to sit in the sandbox for their last 2 minutes and gets totally lost in play and doesn't want to leave when that 2 minutes is up because it wasn't really enough time for them. So once we start to look at where these power struggles are happening, where these challenges are showing up, then we can step back after the fact and look at the cause of it, and maybe next time do it a little bit differently, set it up in advance. If you're a teacher and you're listening, you might be nodding your head, because one of the things that teachers do that makes classrooms run so successfully is they really set things up in advance. There's a lot of pre-thinking that goes into the way that rooms are structured, routines are put into place. In other words, there is a secret to lessening the power struggles that teachers learn, that parents deserve to learn too. And it takes a little while to figure out how to implement this. But once you learn it and you start to apply this new wisdom into your day-to-day experience, you will notice a real diminishing in your child's pushback and breakdowns and struggles. Because when you set things up for success on the front end, there's usually not as much challenge on the back end. Now, having said that, even if you do this, even if you do set things up in advance, you may still have challenges, breakdowns, tantrums, crying, screaming, slamming doors. In that moment, you are not going to change things with your child. In the moment that your car is empty and run out of gas on the side of the road, there's not a whole lot that you can do in that moment, right? You've got to kind of take a step back and regroup and come up with a plan. How am I going to get gas? Do I call for somebody to bring it? Do I walk to it? In other words, you've got to take a couple of steps in that moment. If in the moment of a challenge, you try to talk to a child about what's happened, they are going to shut down or get angry or run away or want to fight with you. In other words, they're going to have a stress response in that moment. And part of the reason why that happens is because of the way that our brains work. When a child is in a breakdown or a moment of challenge, and that can look different, but essentially what it is it's a child having a stress response. The part of their brain where they have logical, rational thought, where they have access to language that expresses their emotions, is offline. I like to think about the brain and the stress response as sort of being like a light switch. Our amygdala, which is the part of our brain where the fight, flight, or freeze response takes place, it goes back to when we had reptilian brains and we were just trying to stay alive. So when our brain perceives a threat, whether it's real or imagined, and that's why if you go to a movie and watch a scary movie, you feel that heart palpitation, that sort of high blood pressure in your body, because when we perceive a threat, we go into a stress response. So if you say to a child something like, "It's time to leave the park," and they perceive that as a threat because they're having so much fun and they really don't want to have to stop, it's like the light switch in their brain gets turned on, their amygdala gets activated. And when the amygdala is activated, the executive functioning part of our brain is shut off. And the executive functioning part of our brain is where we make good decisions, where we can take a breath and express, "Ooh, I'm feeling really upset right now," or I'm really angry, or "I don't want to do that." And so they're in one piece of their brain or the other. If you try to have a conversation with them to give them a tool to use for the next time, and their brain is still their amygdala is still in the on switch, right? Their stress brain is still activated. You're going to feel so frustrated because it's not going to get you anywhere. It's like falling on deaf ears. And so if instead you wait until the brain calms down, until the storm passes, if you wait until that child has taken some deep breaths and rebounded and is able to have a conversation without losing it again, then you can say something like, "Oh, you were really upset when it was time to leave the park." Or, "You got really angry when your brother put his finger across the line in the backseat of the car. What do you think was going on for you there?" When a child is in a calm state of mind, when their brain is online, when they have access to their executive functioning, then they can take a lesson from it. Then they can have some learning. Now, I want to share a little sort of bonus secret here. This is like secret 3.5. Part of the reason why this is so true, especially with highly sensitive kids, is because one of the aspects of being highly sensitive is that we process things really, really deeply. So I'm going to take a little pause here, and I want to share with you 4 traits of highly sensitive people, because understanding this sort of goes back to our first secret of not trying to change who people are. Understanding what it is to be highly sensitive will really go a long way in helping you meet these kids where they are. So the first thing that I want to say about this is Dr. Elaine Aron kind of coined the research on high sensitivity. She wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Person. She wrote a book called The Highly Sensitive Child. They're wonderful resources if you're looking to learn more about the trait, back in the mid-90s. And in her research, she coined an acronym, which is DOES. And this DOES stands for the 4 different aspects of high sensitivity. So I'm going to run through them with you so that way it all kind of makes sense. The D stands for deep processing. That's what I was just alluding to. We process deeply. We feel things deeply. As a highly sensitive person, as an adult, you may watch a movie or have a conversation or see an interaction out in the world, and for days be processing it, unraveling what went on, how you felt, why people did what they did. In other words, that's part of our nature as highly sensitive people. Because highly sensitive children process so deeply, they may need time after an explosive experience to really be able to understand why they behaved the way that they did. They can't tell you in the moment. And this is usually true for highly sensitive adults too. If you have a disagreement with somebody who's highly sensitive or a really wonderful experience with them, it may take them days in order to really be able to express to you what was going on. I had lunch with a friend a couple of days ago who's highly sensitive, and just this morning I got a text saying, "Oh, it was so wonderful to see you, and these were the parts of the conversation that I'm still thinking about, and I meant to tell you this, and this popped into my mind." In other words, it took several days for her to unravel all of what came up based on our lunch that happened days ago. And that's quite normal and typical. I experienced that too. So if you've got a sensitive child, give them a little bit of space after a breakdown. Give them the time to rebound chemically. In other words, when the stress brain is activated, the chemicals that move through our body keep us offline. So it takes a little bit of time for the chemistry in our body to come back to balance. And it also takes time for the brain to be able to process what it is that they experienced, why they had the reaction that they had, why they felt things so intensely. The next part of this acronym, the O, refers to overstimulation, or overwhelm is the way that I like to think about it. And what that means is because we process so deeply, because we take in so much information, energetically, emotionally, and through our senses too, we can easily become overstimulated or overwhelmed. I heard a colleague recently use the metaphor of a bathtub. So if we're thinking about the Prius, about the non-highly sensitive person, you can think about their bathtub as one that fills slowly and drains quickly. In other words, they don't become overwhelmed too quickly. The bathtub fills up nice and slow, and when they pull that plug, it just drains at a nice steady pace. But the highly sensitive person, that Porsche, their bathtub fills quickly and drains slowly. So we can easily become overwhelmed or full, but it takes us a lot longer to unfill or to lessen that overwhelm, that overstimulation. So it's quite normal, typical, common, expected for highly sensitive people to become overstimulated, especially children. When they've been at school all day, they're probably going to have a breakdown when they get home. If they've been taking in a lot through their senses, if a child goes, for example, to a video arcade and things are loud and visual and noisy and there's a lot of people moving around them, they're feeling a lot, they've been moving their body, they're hot and sweaty and hungry and thirsty, they're probably going to have a breakdown because they've become so full, their bathtub is so full that they can't handle one more drop that gets put into it, and so it looks like a breakdown. I also want to say that for highly sensitive adults, as we learn tools and as these children learn tools in their early years, we can lessen that overwhelm. We can take breaks throughout the day. We can learn to meditate, to breathe, to calm ourselves down, to have sensory breaks throughout the day, to turn our phones off and technology off and simply be with ourselves, to process what's been going on so that we don't have a full bathtub to process at the end of the day. So becoming overwhelmed or overstimulated is quite normal, typical, and common. But as we learn tools to handle our sensitivity with in healthier ways, that overwhelm doesn't have to spill over. We don't have to get so full before we begin to empty ourselves out. The third trait that all highly sensitive people have is the E of the DOES. The E stands for emotional sensitivity, or I like to think about it as emotional saturation. So when we think about, for example, sadness or anger or upset or jealousy or fear, for a Prius, right, for a non-highly sensitive person, they might feel that in like a pale blue. And when we think about happiness and joy and excitement, that might be a pale pink. But for the highly sensitive person, for the Porsche, those negative, those unwanted, unpleasant feelings are like despair and depression and hopelessness, and they are in a cobalt blue. And those wanted, positive feelings like elation and joy and ecstasy are like magenta with neon and sparkles and glitter, right? In other words, we feel our emotions deeper. We feel them in more saturation. The other way I like to think about it sometimes is like a crayon box. You know, when you can buy a box of crayons that's like 8 or 12, that's like the Prius. They feel a smaller range of emotions. They feel less nuance in the emotions. But the highly sensitive person, that Porsche, is coloring with that 72 pack, right? We've got way more nuanced emotions and we feel them deeper. So we can feel the difference between, let's say, frustration and upset and anger and shame in ways that a non-highly sensitive person might not distinguish. We've got more crayons, more colors in our box than non-highly sensitive people. And so again, it's quite common, normal, typical for children especially to be coloring with all of those crayons, to be feeling all of these emotions. I also want to say that if you as an adult are not highly sensitive, but you have a child that is highly sensitive, it is really, really hard to understand what's going on for them. conversely, for a highly sensitive child to be in a family or a school or an environment where nobody else is highly sensitive can feel very isolating for them. And they can grow up thinking, what is wrong with me? Why am I so needy? Why am I so high maintenance? Why am I, as a Porsche, needing more than everybody else in my family who's a Prius? Why do I care what kind of gas goes in my tank? Why do I care that my car is washed and shined and buffed and all of those things? And so there's no right or wrong here. There's no one way to be. It's really about coming to understand that we are who we are and meeting that child where they are. If you've been coloring with a box of 8 crayons and this other kid shows up with 72 and they're showing you magenta and lilac and hazel and indigo and all you've got is pink and purple, you might say, oh my gosh, I've never seen those colors before. And it doesn't have to be with judgment. It could be with curiosity, like, wow, never seen those colors before. Tell me about them. Let's see how to use them. Let's see what they look like. When we approach it with curiosity and interest rather than fear and I don't know what to do with this, then we've got the opportunity to really help these kids. Before I get on to the last trait of high sensitivity, I want to say here that high sensitivity is a genetic trait. It is inherited and it is passed down. So typically, if a child is highly sensitive, at least one of their biological parents, if not grandparents, will have the trait. I work a lot with families that have adopted children, because if you are not highly sensitive, but you adopt a child who is, a lot of this might sound very foreign to you. It's like walking into it's like, I think about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? Like if you live in a black and white world and you move into a world that is full color spectrum, it can be very challenging to know what other people are talking about. So the highly sensitive child may be experiencing things that you as a non-highly sensitive adult never accessed or never really experienced. And there's nothing wrong with you either. We've all just got these different ways of moving through life. The fourth trait of high sensitivity is the S, and that stands for sensing subtleties. And we sort of talked about that a little bit in the D, in the depth of processing, because as sensitive people, we do notice subtleties. We notice things that are overt, like maybe somebody got a haircut, or they lost weight, or they moved pillows around in their house, or they're wearing a certain color that looks really beautiful. In other words, we might notice some superficial sensitivities. We may notice other sensory sensitivities, like, wow, that's really loud, or that smells really delicious, or ugh, that smells gross. We may notice energetic sensitivities, like walking into a room and feeling really welcomed, or walking into a room and feeling like, I gotta get out of here, or meeting somebody for the first time and being really drawn or repelled by them. I worked with a family a couple of years ago. Their boy was about 8 or 9 at the time. And because mom had been working with me for a little while, and she began to really understand that her son had a very sensitive, energetic system, meaning his intuition was really, really keen. Sometimes he would feel things that didn't logically make sense, but he just knew it in his gut. Mom told me that they had gone to dinner in a restaurant. The son really wanted to go to this place, and they sat down and they ordered their food and were waiting for the food to come. And their son saw a man sitting in the corner of the restaurant. And he said, I don't like that man. And the mom said, well, ignore him, sort of like, ignoring my brother in the backseat of the car. And the son kept saying, no, I don't like him. I don't like the way that he's looking at me. I want to leave. And because mom knew what she knew, she said to him, okay. And they got their food to go and they left the restaurant. And I don't know whatever happened with that man. I don't know if there was something nefarious about him, or if maybe the son's intuition was off. But he knew something didn't feel right there. He knew that something about that man felt wrong. He sensed something there. And so he told mom that he wanted to leave, and mom was willing to meet him where he was, and off they went. So these 4 traits, depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional sensitivity, and sensing subtleties, are the 4 common traits of all highly sensitive people, whether you're on that real introverted side of the spectrum or that real extroverted side of the spectrum. Doesn't matter. That's the main umbrella that we're talking about when we're talking about high sensitivity. Someone sent me a message privately that asks if tantrums are a characteristic of highly sensitive children. They're not a characteristic of highly sensitive children, but they're quite common for sensitive children. Having tantrums or breakdowns or freakouts, I like to call them combustion points, because there are just these points where children can't handle it anymore. They're quite common because of the overstimulation. Because when a child reaches that overwhelm, when their bathtub is full and a little more goes in it and it spills over, it looks like a tantrum. I want to say highly sensitive adults have tantrums sometimes too, until we embody healthy tools, emotionally healthy tools that help us deal with our overwhelm, speak up for ourselves in ways that are kind and compassionate, advocate in the world, set things up in a way that work for us, until we learn how to do that for ourselves. And that can start in the very early toddler years. We don't have to wait until we're adults and go to therapy or work with a parent coach to do that. But until we have those tools, it's very common to become so overwhelmed that we have tantrums in one form or another. And adults have tantrums, they just look different from children's tantrums. They could look like road rage, they could look like yelling at strangers out in public, they could be screaming at your spouse or your children. In other words, we all reach our breaking points, but it's a matter of what do we do on a regular basis to avoid reaching that point so consistently. If you're reaching it on a daily basis, the good news is that it's time for you to learn some tools so that you don't have to keep going there, right? Whether or not we're talking about children or adults, these challenges are always opportunities for us to learn more. So I want to say, since we're getting close to our time and I see a couple of other questions coming in, I'm going to try and get through them in a moment. I want to share with you that I'm doing a 3-month group coaching program that starts in September. And in this 3 months, what I'm going to do is continue to give you tools, more specific tools and strategies, more understanding about temperament and hardwiring, about how you can set things up in advance, creating routines, structures, rules. Rules are a really big one that parents struggle with, consequences to replace punishment, all sorts of tools that will turn you into the mechanic that your child's behavior is asking for. What happens for a lot of parents that I see, and the mistake that they make, is that they get really inspired by their desire to help their children, but they think that they can get there without any more support, that they've got enough, books and strategies and learning and podcasts and webinars and all these things that they can do it on their own. But what I've seen is that when parents have a really strong support system, that they can get there so much easier. And so over the next 3 months, what I'm going to do is give you the tools to get there, give you the tools to turn you into the mechanic that your children need, help you build your own custom manuals to understand these children, these beings for who they are, the environmental factors that have contributed to any of the challenges that they're experiencing, any of the misbehaviors. The other thing that this program does is it helps you trust that your highly sensitive children are going to be okay in the world. So many parents come to me with young children and they're so worried that their kids aren't going to be able to handle life when they get older. And if they don't learn tools, that may be true. But if we meet the children where they are in these moments, and we give them the tools that they need, those tools will grow with them. They will help them be able to handle life in new ways. They will be able to handle the overwhelm that is natural for who they are without it turning into daily tantrums, multiple tantrums throughout the day. I also want to say that the entire coaching program is less than the cost of one private coaching session with me. So it's a really, really good value. I'm going to be releasing this program to the public in the next week or so. When I release it, the cost for the program is $299 for all 3 months. There's also a payment plan of, I think it's like $111 a month if you want to pay once a month for 3 months. But for people that sign up today, I'm going to give you until the end of tomorrow, actually. That way, if people are watching the recording of this, they can still take advantage of it. You can sign up for $149, which is half of the regular price. So the way that the program works is twice a month for 3 months. We will meet through Zoom, through a link just like this. The sessions are about an hour, and then I stay on for about 15 or 20 minutes at the end to answer questions. So if you can join me live, please do so. You're welcome to stay on, type your questions in the chat box as we go. I'll also unmute people at the end of the call. That way, if you want to ask live questions, you're more than welcome to. So you can get some personal private coaching. And I'll walk you through step by step all of these tools that you need in order to understand who your child is. Each session you'll have a light homework assignment. It's not too time intensive, I promise. You also can watch these recordings with your parenting partner. If you're a nanny, you can watch them with the family that you work for. If you're a teacher, you can really embody this stuff and bring it into your classroom. Again, while I generally talk about the parent-child relationship, this stuff applies to anybody who lives or works with children. So you are welcome to watch live, watch the recordings. The other thing I was going to tell you about the program, it escapes my mind, I'm a little distracted looking at the questions that are coming in, is that I have seen what I know to be true is that when parents are committed to doing this work, when they make a decision in their mind that they want to transform their children's behavior, if they do the things that we talk about, they will see changes in their lives. I've seen it happen with hundreds, if not thousands of families around the world. I do all of this work in my private coaching sessions, but I'm bringing the same tools, tips, strategies, learning into this group coaching program. And it's a really wonderful foundation. If you want to work with me privately, I'll often encourage parents to take this program first and to learn some of these basic tools and strategies, because then we can just work together a couple of times and really refine what it is that's going on. I did do this program earlier this year and got really wonderful feedback from the parents. So I've tweaked it a little bit based on some of their suggestions. And I'm also going to be offering some follow-up programs that will come down the road. So anybody who takes this intro program, this 6-session program, is able to then take the additional classes that talk about things like sibling dynamics, co-parenting, co-parenting with somebody who's got substance issues. There are all sorts of kind of nuanced topics that we'll get into. So if you're interested, feel free to send me a message. I will also paste the link, so that way if you want to sign up, you can take advantage of it. And I will also include the link when I send out a recording of this session in a little bit. So I'm going to share the link with you now, and then I'm going to read through these questions that came in. And if anybody wants to ask a question, feel free to type it in the chat box. I'm going to stay on for another 5, 10, 15 minutes or so, and try and get to as many questions as I can. I see a bunch of them were sent to me privately and to everyone. And if anybody wants to ask a question, you can also let me know, and then I can unmute you. So I'm just going to take a little pause here and read some of these questions, and then I will follow up with you in a moment. So one mom talking about feeling the energy in the rooms when she was younger. It's totally something that stays with us as adults. I also wanted to say that a lot of parents that I work with that are highly sensitive, when they were younger, got the message that who they were wasn't okay, that there was something wrong with them feeling things so deeply. And so they sort of shut it off to an extent. In other words, they hid away that they were able to pick things up. And in doing a lot of this work, they have kind of reawoken to some of their sensitivities. I didn't talk a whole lot about it today, which I'm realizing now is that being highly sensitive is sort of neutral. It's neither a gift nor a curse. There's no inherent betterness in having a Porsche or a Prius. Yeah, it's fun to drive a Porsche. And when all of its needs are met, it's probably the most fun car in the road to drive, but it has a lot of needs that need to get met. And, if you're just running to Target and soccer practice, you might not want a sports car. You might just want a Prius. And so we've all got our natural intrinsic value, our natural gifts. And as sensitive people, we make really good therapists and coaches and teachers and nannies and artists and musicians, poets, creatives. We do really well in careers like advertising and human relations, places where we, interact with people, massage therapy, all of these different fields where our intuition, our ability to sense subtleties, our ability to read other people and read a room and feel the energy of what's going on around us, it really benefits us and those that are with us. So for a lot of the parents that are listening that are themselves highly sensitive, I want to say that this group program helps you unlock a lot of your own stuff, because while we're really talking about the children in your life, we're also talking about your own inner child. We're talking about unlocking what your inner child needed, giving your inner child those tools. Because if you had gotten them in your childhood, you would have them now in your adulthood. And most of us didn't get them, not for blaming our parents. It's like the older generation didn't know what we needed. Most of them weren't able to identify that we were highly sensitive, even if they saw it. The research wasn't out there when we were growing up. So a lot of the tools and strategies that I offer, while they are directed at children, parents that are highly sensitive, usually tell me that the work that they do for their kids changes their lives too. Because like I said in the beginning here, this is what we all need. We all need this stuff. We all want to be understood. We all want to be accepted for who we are. We all want our behavior to be met with compassion rather than judgment. We all want the gift of being able to calm down before we're spoken to about what we did that was inappropriate, or how we could do it differently next time. In other words, we all want those same things. And so what I've just found is that these sensitive parents get to reawaken the gifts of their sensitivity through wanting to meet their children's needs, which ends up being this really beautiful symbiotic experience. One mom saying here privately something along those lines, that that she didn't feel understood as a child, and coming to understand her sensitive daughter helped her understand herself better. So one mom saying here that her mom was saying she didn't become overly sensitive until her sister was born. So I want to just clarify that when we use the term overly sensitive, it may be different than highly sensitive. So I'm really careful to say highly sensitive, not too sensitive, not overly sensitive, not extra sensitive, because those terms imply some judgment. When we use the word highly sensitive, we're talking about a more sensitive nervous system. If you were not highly sensitive as a child and something in your life catalyzed a shift in the way that you're interacting, one of two things could happen. One is that all of your needs were being met in the beginning of your life before your sister was born. In other words, let's go back to the cars for a second. You may have had a Porsche, and then you decided to get a second Porsche. And so the first Porsche wasn't maintained as regularly or consistently as it was initially. And so it started to show some problems, right? But it wasn't because there was anything wrong with that car. It was like the maintenance wasn't being kept up in the same way. And so the performance shifted. So that's one possibility. And it's something that I see quite frequently when additional children are brought into a family, especially when the older child is highly sensitive. They very frequently struggle, have more breakdowns. We see behavioral changes because their needs aren't being met in quite the same way. The other thing that's possible is that the car, the initial child was a Prius. And when that other child came into the picture, that Prius wasn't being maintained. And that Prius began to really struggle, even though it was pretty low maintenance to begin with. Maybe its maintenance really fell off the radar. And so it started to look more like a Porsche, or look more sensitive, more problematic, more breakdowns. But it was just because it was really not having its needs met. So that could be one of two things. But if you identify currently as being highly sensitive, my guess is it's the first, that your needs were really being met in the beginning, And when your younger sibling was born, it just kind of changed the way that your needs were being met. And so it looked like you were more sensitive. Another question here about is negativity a common trait for highly sensitive people? Again, I wouldn't say it's a common trait. The four common traits are the DOES that I talked about. Negativity or pessimism, in my experience, is more rooted in environmental circumstances. One of the things that I'll talk about in the group coaching program is the difference between temperament and personality. Temperament is innate. It is hardwired into who we are. Negativity is not part of temperament. Personality is shaped. Personality is like the way that our temperament is understood or misunderstood, and that molds into our personality. So if our temperament is really not understood and we feel powerless and we're struggling and we're not being met with emotionally healthy discipline, we're feeling controlled and powerless in a lot of areas, the personality will morph, and it can look quite negative, or it can look quite aggressive or defiant. I work a lot with families who have children that have oppositional defiance disorder. In my experience, that is not innate. That is absolutely curated by the environment that the child is in. It's sort of like, I live at the beach here in San Diego, for those of you who don't know, and I would say that it's like if you leave your Porsche out by the beach and the salt water corrodes the car, there's nothing wrong with the car. It's the environment that it's in. The corrosion is happening because it's living at the beach. And I know it seems like kind of a weird metaphor to use because living at the beach is awesome, but it's true. My car is really corroded. All of my costume jewelry is really corroded from living at the beach. In other words, when we move that car into a different environment where there's no moisture, it won't corrode in the same way. And so the negativity is like that corrosion. It's environmental, it's circumstantial, and it certainly can shift and morph. The other piece of that could be trauma. We didn't get into that at all today, but highly sensitive people, children, are more prone to experiencing trauma because we feel things so deeply, and because of the way that our brains work. Our brains function differently than non-highly sensitive brains. That's something else that we'll talk about in the group coaching program. So all of these combinations can look like negativity, but they're not, it's not innate. It's not, what's the word? You're not doomed to be negative if you're highly sensitive, if that makes sense. Another question here. Talking about skin picking. That to me sounds like anxiety. I want to say that, especially at 8 years old, I've worked with many families with children who've had things like skin picking, thumb sucking, hair pulling, potty regression, holding, not eliminating properly, having all sorts of poop issues, pooping around the house. We can talk about poop for hours. All of those behaviors, again, from my experience, speak to anxiety that the child doesn't know what to do with. It doesn't mean that there's an anxiety disorder present necessarily. There's something in the environment that's going on for that child that isn't working for them. They're needing something. And so what we want to do is figure out what is at the root of that behavior for that child. Usually it either goes back to an event or a change that happened or a move or a death or there's something that happened for that child where they're feeling uneasy, out of control, anxious, scared, isolated, frightened. In other words, there's something that's going on that's kind of causing it. That's the kind of thing that we can talk about privately. I can help you get to the root of it, or, moving through the coaching program and kind of going through the steps, you may be able to come to it on your own as I sort of guide you through the process that I use to kind of get to what it is that goes on. So, there's a method in the way that I work, in the questions that I ask parents to figure out the environment. And so as I give you that insight, those kind of questions to figure out what it is that's going on for that child, why their behavior is happening in the way that it is it temperament? Is it age and stage of development? Is it rooted in the environment? Is there something in the discipline that's going on? Is there something in their family structure, the school environment? In other words, there are all of these moving pieces and factors. And once we start to pull them out piece by piece, we can figure out what is at the root of what's causing that specific misbehavior or that check engine light on the car, right? My mom had an experience about a year ago with her car where her tire pressure light kept coming on. And every time it came on, they would check the tire pressure and there was nothing wrong with the tire pressure. And after like a year of it happening, she took the car to a mechanic and the mechanic said that there was, again, I know nothing about cars, so pardon me if you're a car expert and my explanation is off. There was something about a hose. There was some hose or a tube and it was cracked. And because there was a crack in this particular connector, it read on the check engine panel as though there was a problem with the tire pressure, but it wasn't actually the tire pressure. It was happening someplace else in the car. That can happen with children too. Sometimes we'll see a specific misbehavior that looks like it's the tire pressure light, but we check the tire pressure and that's not it. And so we can't understand why it keeps happening. But there's always a reason for it. There's always a root. And we just have to keep troubleshooting to figure out where it is that it's coming from to get to that root. Here's the other thing that happens. If we don't figure out where it's coming from, it will get bigger. It will continue to show up. That light will get brighter and louder. The ding, ding, ding on your car will continue to get louder. And so ignoring it, while sometimes it feels like that's the easiest thing to do, it's not the emotionally healthy thing to do. It's not the way to equip this child to learn how to become their own mechanic, to navigate life, understanding what they need, meeting their needs in healthy ways. When I work with families, what I always try and do is give them the tools that they can then teach to their children so that those kids know how to take care of themselves as they grow. It's like, if you learn how to change a tire on your car, then you can teach your child how to change a tire on their car. But if you don't know how to change a tire, it's really hard for you to teach them how to do it. And that's where your growth as an adult comes in here. You get to learn all of these tools for yourself too. And that is really the coolest piece about it. So as you learn the tools, as you learn how to build your own manual, you're learning how to do it for your children too and how to teach it to them. So it ends up being a really wonderful experience. I think I got through all of the questions that were here. I see one more that I must have missed before, something about high sensitivity and alcohol. I want to say that highly sensitive people do really well as alcoholics and addicts. Now that technology is part of our society, technology addiction has become really challenging for a lot of families with children. I work a lot with parents who have kids that are playing video games or on devices, and really struggling to regulate how much time their kids are spending on devices, getting their kids off the devices, dealing with their children once they're off the devices and dysregulated. That is certainly something that we're going to touch on in the group program. What happens is when we don't have healthy tools to deal with our emotions, we often turn to things outside of ourselves, and alcohol and substance, all sorts of addictions, food, codependency, sex, technology, TV. We've got all of these things in our lives that we can use to kind of disassociate from how we feel or to numb our emotions. But learning how to feel all of our emotions, how to color with that full coloring box, and recognize the role that our emotions play in our lives is really beneficial, not just for ourselves, but for the children too, because if we don't know how to do it, it's really hard for us to teach them how to do it. So I hope that was helpful. If anybody's got any lingering questions, I'll stay on for another minute or so and give you an opportunity. You're also welcome to send it to me privately if you don't want to share it with the whole group. You can just select private, I believe, and send it my way. And if you're interested in taking the group program, we start, I don't have the date offhand, we start the Monday after Labor Day, and it will go for 3 months. It's every other Monday for 3 months. It's at the same time, 12 o'clock Pacific time, and it's recorded. You can watch live, you can watch the recording, you can share it with your parenting partner, and it's a really, really wonderful program. And so if you found today helpful and you want more, I really encourage you to sign up for it. $149 will get you access to all 6 sessions. And I really hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bye for now.